calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Yeah! Welcome back to Calling All Beings. We are back. I miss my brother and sister Nathan and Debs since I saw them in NYC, and we're back with a genuine gentleman, an academician, a brilliant individual, kind of like Nathan, kind of like Debs, not very much like me. But, man, we're super excited. But before we get into all that business with him, let's say hello to the co-conspirator of this joint, Money Nathan.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? It's good to be back in the saddle. I really enjoyed seeing you guys in New York, as you mentioned. It's great to be on tonight with Ben. Really excited to talk to him and excited to see the questions that we'll see in the chat. So thanks, everybody, for joining the chat this evening.
Can I get an amen? And we have our researcher with us. The smart person keeps us grounded, keeps us in the right space, and that is Deb, a study of UAPs, the host of Deb's Data Dojo, who I'm going to be on with tomorrow night with Leah Prime. How are you, Debs?
I'm excited to be here. I wish that I had something really clever to say, but I feel like today is about being smart because we're talking to Ben.
Well, it was cool. You told patients that they couldn't come and get therapy today, so you could talk to Ben. There's nothing to be embarrassed about that. It's okay.
No, that's not what happens. They canceled on me.
It's all good, man. It's all good, Debs. The secret is safe with us, with UFO Twitter. But no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Deb would never do that. So yeah, we're about to get into it with this man right here. He is the host of the Discovery Channel's UFO Witness. He's also has shows on the Travel Channel. He's a pilot. He's a marksman, surfer, hooper, rock climber, disaster response volunteer, and he's also a former special agent with the FBI. Come to praise his name. Yeah. And don't mess with this man, because if you do, he'll have a set of flex cuffs on you faster than you can say, Donnie Brasco.
That's it.
So party people, put your hands together for Discovery Channel's own Ben Hansen.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's got to be one of the most energetic introductions I've had in a while. I want whatever you got on your Cheerios.
I'll tell you, hey brother, this is just me, man.
All
These guys
natural.
have seen me in person. This is
It's organic. Yeah.
Welcome,
Nice.
Ben. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you. You're so accomplished that it's it's almost staggering reading your list of accomplishments and your endeavors that you get into, and as somebody who aspires to be diverse in the types of things I do, it's actually pretty inspiring.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, diverse is probably the best descriptor. I have my feet in too many things. Too many. It's hard to keep up with all the different worlds, but I enjoy it. I guess it's kind of how I roll.
You know what else is really interesting? Ben is frozen, or am I frozen?
I think he is frozen.
He is frozen. Okay, Deb, we all good?
Uh-oh.
Okay,
Oh,
Ben's
Yeah,
back.
it's not.
I hear him.
Okay.
I'm moving. You guys are
He's moving. He's moving. All right, he's back. He's back.
Okay,
Yes.
there he is. Okay, a little pixelation. Ben, the way it seems like it's shaping up right now, and something that I find interesting, is you're sort of become the voice of commercial pilots to sort of get their story off of just, FAA tape reels and ATC's reels and get them out to the public so that people can digest what they're seeing from the perspective of a subject matter expert. Is that a role that you just sort of fell into? Is it something that you relish? How do you see yourself right now in terms of aggregating these sightings and information?
Yeah, it is. I just sort of fell into it. Like you had mentioned, I am a pilot. I'm just, well, if I buckled down, I could finish up my commercial license, in just a couple of months here. But I've been reporting on pilot stuff ever since about August, kind of almost exclusively. And these guys, it's really cool because it is sort of a tight community, right? And they talk to each other a lot. They a lot of people like kind of think, behind that cockpit door, they're all serious and they're all this and that. And when they see stuff though, they geek out like everybody else, and they can't believe what they're seeing. And they need to be trusted though, because they deal with things like if they report, one guy explained it. He's like, if I came out yesterday and said that I saw the coolest satellite last night and I videoed it, and I go out and put on social media, the airlines wouldn't say anything about it. He's like, but if I come out and say that I filmed or saw a UFO, all of a sudden a lot of these airlines jump on them and they threaten them with discipline, with, possibly termination. And so they face a lot of risk coming out sometimes to talk about this. And so they want to tell someone, but they don't know where to go. And that's kind of how I fell into it, because I think I've gained that trust. Mm-hmm. And I can talk the talk, and I'm, I know the technical stuff they're dealing with. And it's been really cool. It's been really cool to be kind of a voice for them. And especially Ryan Graves, right? That is out there, F-18 pilot, saw things himself, and he noticed first, well before anyone else did, that there needs to be major changes. So he's working on the military side and being a voice for them and for commercial pilots. And now we've kind of joined together and we're working on some things.
That's really cool. That kind of collaboration. Even Chris Lato tried to get, and he's a friend of ours, fellow aviator. He tried to get Ryan Graves on. And so if you're the person that can bring his voice to, I shouldn't say to a wider audience, because a lot of people have heard him, but a more consistent voice in the disclosure. I don't even say it's disclosure. Basically, from an informational perspective, because he lends a lot of credibility, and if he's more present, that means more credibility for what people are seeing. That frankly, people don't know what it is, what we're looking at, and that's what
Absolutely.
you so eloquently did in your last video. So, let me turn you over to Money Nathan.
Yeah, Ben, great to have you with us this evening. And I know we don't have a ton of time, so I wanted if you could jump to talking a little bit about, I know you've got a security background, you've got a background that is also academic, and you've thought about some of the psychological impacts of these kinds of events. Is there a certain aspect that really excites you more than the other? And what do you think about, in terms of, DJ mentioned disclosure, kind of whether or not the government should or shouldn't reveal exactly what it may or may not know from a national security standpoint? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it all interests me. I mean, the UFO subject is primarily, my favorite thing. I've done a lot of shows. We've even looked for mermaids, in some of the shows I do, and the ghost hunting and all that. UFOs are probably my favorite subject because I think it has the most potential for impact on society, right? And it involves history. So I can see, having worked for the government and understanding national security, I can see where they're coming from. And when I did my thesis recently on what I call reality compromising events, I realized at some point towards the end of it, I was writing a playbook, what I would do. I was like, wait a second. It seems like some of this is happening. And for example, one of the things I think that would be the safest way for disclosure is what we call the drip method, right? And you just slowly give a little bit of information, let that sit there for a bit. Don't even mention anything else for another 6 months or whatever. Put out a little bit more. If that's what's happening, it kind of seems to fit the pattern and letting people acclimatize. Because if you do the rip off the Band-Aid method, that's where my research indicated it could be very, very bad. And not just because whoever they are, I mean, they could be a potential physical threat to us. We have had nukes that have been shut down and airspace incursions, near misses, all those things that we talk about. But even if they're not a threat, people and the way that we react to things, we saw a bit of this in COVID, is a big problem. Right? It only takes a small percentage of the population, not a majority by far, to overreact, to engage in violence and crime, to make the world feel unsafe, and that starts what we call cascading effects, and then that trickles down very rapidly to bring the whole system down. And before you know it, you're back at your home on lockdown. People can't work, factories don't produce, food and necessities, all those problems 100 times worse than what we saw in COVID. And that's what worries me, is that we're so interconnected as a society. You're dealing with something that's a reality shift. Most of it might be okay with most people, but some are not going to handle it well, and they're the ones that are going to cause problems.
And I would just ask you to just follow up. So what is what was your thesis on how it should be done?
Well, I did offer some recommendations, and based on like the modern theories of panic and how people react to emergencies and disasters, most people don't panic. They don't like trample each other getting out of a theater that's on fire. Most people don't. But the problem was those studies were based on physical threats. Most of those were based on threats that were known. And the problem with the ET scenarios have so many unknown. It's called the unknown unknowns. We don't even know what we don't know, right? And so it's like when we're presented with this, and you have the legitimacy of the state, the government, who now has to either tell us that they were lying all along and that they knew, or number two, they have to say, we know as much as you do and we don't have any answers, which is not comforting. Either way, they lose legitimacy overnight, right? And so I think my recommendation really is that if they do know something, they have to stay ahead of the news. They've got to do their best to control, and really the drip method I think would be best, and stay ahead of the narrative of the social media. The media is going to try and put on this. And third, we need to build resiliency. Which, how do you do that? How do you make people more resilient to change when in a scenario like this? Do you
Desensitize.
show them more ET movies? Do you prepare them for little by little what these things might look like, how we might interact, how society is going to look? I don't think anyone really knows. And so the question is, if they're secret keepers, if there truly is a group who's keeping this from us, they're not going to be able to do it forever. And it's going to be up to them, the visitors, whoever they are. They could at any moment just turn the whole thing upside down and say, we're doing it. If it's up to us, then we have more control and more time, but eventually that dam is going to burst. And so that's what I worry about. It's not really them as more as us and how we're going to react to it that seems to be the problem.
When Jim Semivan was sitting in your chair, he said, he may be speaking from a lot more knowledge than what he let on, but he said, I think they know more than we know, but they don't know it all. And how do they explain something they don't fully understand?
Absolutely. Yeah.
With that, I got to pass it over to Debs because I don't want her to shank me after the show.
I won't. I wouldn't do that. But I was thinking that I do feel that we do have evidence that the phenomenon itself is using the slow drip method. They've been doing it for at least 80 years, but some would argue thousands, right? So there's that. So the phenomenon really is already engaging in that sense. Lou Elizondo said they basically are waving to us now. But what I wanted to ask you was, since you do have a lot of experience with, behavior, and you did some videos on body language, which were fascinating. Since you're going out and talking to some of these big names in UFOs for some of the shows you're doing, do you feel like your spidey senses are going off a little bit when you're interacting with them, or are you feeling like you're getting a better idea of what's going on because they're in front of you? Are you reading something from them that we might not be catching because we're not there in front of them?
Yeah, I think definitely. Take, for example, the Pascagoula case. All right, Calvin Parker, and it was 1975, I think.
Yep.
And Pascagoula, a couple guys, finish work, go fishing. And when you hear the story, it's very, very odd, like a sci-fi movie. So if you only knew that, it's like, it's total BS. Like these three, like aliens are floating. They don't see legs and they're like kind of look like robots, and they grab them with clamp-like pinchers on their arms. But I'll tell you what, like when you meet, Calvin Parker in person and talk to him, he's so just down to earth and humble. And you can see this guy has nothing to gain, by coming out telling this very consistent story for all these years. So yeah, I think there are things you can't really put I guess a measuring stick to say this person's lying or they're not. But when you get to meet them in person, you can tell if you've done this, which I used to interview, kids mainly and victims of horrendous sex crimes. And the trauma that you see in them is very similar to interviewing some alleged abductees. And whether something actually happened or didn't to some of them, I can pretty certainly say I think that nearly everyone I've talked to really feels that they're speaking the truth of what they experienced. So if that makes sense, like whether some of them experience maybe a surreal, like a sleep paralysis or some other things, but they're not making it up. Right. And so then you get into this soul abduction thing. I don't know what to think of that, to be honest, because I feel like I'm pretty grounded. But when someone tells me their soul could be taken out and taken up through the ceiling and go to the ship, but they never physically leave, I have to have an open mind to these things. But it is hard for me to swallow because we want the person to actually disappear from their bed. We want them, like Bobby was here, now he's not, and now he comes back. So there's a lot to this that I just think that like we can't even begin to understand until we acknowledge that at least the people are being, most of them are truthful to what they know, and then let's figure out what's happening.
And some emotions are really difficult to fake. And when you hear the surreptitious police station recording of Calvin and the other gentleman, I believe his last name is Hickson.
Yeah,
Um,
Charlie Eason. Mm-hmm.
Charles Hickson, right? It's very difficult to. I mean, you were in the business, but it's difficult to fake that kind of emotion. Just like when you hear certain Bigfoot experiencers and they say an alpha type man, if you will, quote says I peed on myself. They don't normally give those
Yeah.
kind of details unless it happened.
If you're going to get abducted or you're going to see Bigfoot, hope that you have witnesses with you. Because
Yeah.
number one, like you don't normally hear the stories unless there was someone there. Like the Travis Walton case, like I've told Travis many times, it's a wrong way to say this, you were lucky, but you were lucky that you had the people there. Because otherwise, well, I guess he didn't want the world to know anyways, but no one would probably have heard what happened unless you had 7 witnesses, right? Taking polygraphs and everything. And that's much, much harder to fake and concoct and to stick to the same story. And same with Calvin, like many, many people experience things and they're all alone. And it's just kind of like listening to someone's dream. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, they came down and did what to you? Okay. You don't have video of it, do you? All right, well, I guess maybe it happened. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have witnesses, we really hear about these stories and we can add more credence to them.
That's true. I've heard some encounters on both that I don't believe, and I've heard some that I truly believe, and that's just down to me and my personal intuition and opinion. But did want to ask you regarding, because you've done so much work, we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss some of these encounters, and the one that you documented close to Little Rock. It's funny. I used to be stationed there, and they were talking about Greer's Ferry Lake. That's where I went through flight school. Was at Little Rock. Yeah.
Nice.
But to me, some of the most compelling aspects of that are not hyperspeed necessarily, but as you talked about, them flying in a circuitous manner at a velocity that craft that are conventionally powered or powered by anything that we know that operates under Bernoulli's theorem and Newton's laws of motion, etc., could not do that. You went into that at length, but I'm curious what so hovering to me is fantastic when something can hover at these altitudes. So I'm curious what you find to be the most compelling of what you've seen in these several cases that you've taken on since, like, let's say August.
Well, for those who have seen them, I encourage people to watch the whole series as a progression, because the last one I put out was some ATC radar or chatter and stuff, and I have more of that. I've got a lot of that, and I had to push it aside because I'm working on a really big case now. Totally different phenomena, but it's really exciting with the footage, and we're trying to figure out where these things are. But as far as these racetrack patterns, I do think, and I guess I want to say this properly, I had always considered the possibility of satellites. I think I was mistaken that we have a new configuration of satellites that are just doing orbits and stuff that we haven't seen before. The intensity of if it's Starlink, of the flaring and all that. So the majority can be explained by that. But what we haven't had time to do yet, my research partner Brittany and I, is to put out what we call an outlier case. The outliers, we have several incidents where the F-18 pilot I originally reported on, where he's talking about these things starting over there in the north. They were doing kind of circular paths, but they moved from there directly over his aircraft. A seventh one came down from, it looked like, space and joined. It stopped and then joined the other ones. I've got others who have seen these things move and stop and then take off almost like the speed of a bolt of lightning. Okay, so stopping and then going. And so what we want to do is lay out these outlier cases and tell people, look, don't just dismiss things because we can explain a good portion of these as satellites. And like, okay, anything that pilots see that's similar, it's solved. It's not. I really think that's a big mistake.
Right.
And especially because we have to consider the possibility that I don't want to jump to the conclusion that they are trying to mimic or mixing in with this new satellite phenomena and disguising themselves. No, I'm not saying that. But because pilots are more aware to look for strange things now, and there's a lot of buzz going on here, I think we're getting more reports of these outliers as well, and things that just can't be explained. We have yet not heard from SpaceX, and I'm just saying me, the little guy. I'm talking about NBC, the Today Show, some Daily Mail, and some of those others were reporting on this stuff. Nobody has received word back from SpaceX or from the FAA or NASA in regards to what these things are. So this is their problem too. They're the ones who are getting these reports and filling up the channels and with a chatter and being a distraction to pilots. So if there is an answer, and if SpaceX knows or the FAA has some control over this, why aren't you notifying your pilots? Why aren't you coming out and saying, this is what they look like? If you see this is probably what it is, and start helping in the process. And I don't mean to be too harsh on them because they have limited resources right now. But what happens is they report it. Their supervisor at the ATC says, that's interesting. Maybe they make a couple phone calls, end of story. Hardly ever is a report filed that goes higher up the food chain, and nobody has called any of my pilots for follow-up, right? And so you're left with people like us who are doing it for basically free in our time because we have a vested interest in the safety of it. And I think it's important that people know what's going on.
It's definitely a passion. And by the way, for those of you who want to check out Ben's awesome videos that are quite detailed, and he went to great lengths, you see it on your screen there, Hypo Center Productions 101 on YouTube. Money Nathan.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, you and I think you're touching on this some, and we can expound on it a little bit further. But when we're talking about pilots, commercial pilots, some who are just transferring freight, but many who are responsible for people's lives. I mean, we're talking about people that are shuttling human beings around constantly in the air, and for governments not to tell them a little bit more about what they might be seeing, it just seems like incredibly irresponsible. I mean, the argument that this might be some kind of black tech or whatnot that the government is just kind of experimenting with in space. Okay, sure, maybe that, if that is the case, fine. But there is some level of responsibility, I would imagine, to at least the FAA to say, hey, look, we're kind of playing around with some new toys up there, and we don't want you to be distracted by this. We're counting on you to kind of do your job and not have to, pull out your cell phone and try to film this or fill out a report that just clutters up things that may distract us from doing other tasks that are really important.
Yeah, and it just gets put basically in a dustbin. It just is like, I understand within their scope of what they're given, they don't have the ability to investigate it. The FAA's, that's not their job. But then whose is it? And the task force, whoever needs to revamp the policy of reporting, of follow-up. We've got, just to kind of tease this, once I clear my plate of this new big thing I think is pretty big, we have a couple daytime sightings. Nothing to do with these racetrack patterns, but objects that seem to be pacing or in the airspace with video, of aircraft. And it's like, okay, now I have a potential of a near miss or something, of this object. So what are they going to do about it? And it's call up ATC. Okay, no, don't have anything on radar. Okay, move along. It's like,
right. Right. Yep. Don't see it. Sorry.
yeah. And so you wonder why pilots don't want to report. They're like, all it is a negative, a loss for them of risk, because their airline could retaliate against them if it went public. Why did you tell this person or that? Or the FAA, some of them, whether this is true or not, some of them are still afraid. There's a myth, that they're going to come along and remove your medical because you're reporting crazy things, right? And then you can't fly anymore, which I don't think is a real legit thing that still happens. But some of them are afraid of that. And so they're like, if the FAA doesn't going to do anything with it, what's the point of me telling them?
I was going to say, fortunately, what you're doing, you're destigmatizing it, because we have heard those. I don't know if it's the beginning of Martin Willis's show. It's one of the shows out there where somebody's talking to Charlotte Center and they're saying, do you want to report a UFO? Like, no, we don't want to report anything. Do you want to report a UFO? No, we don't want to report anything. But and I think with the question I wrote down, and I got to get this to Debs, but basically it was interesting. The controller very wisely never asked any of those pilots if they wanted to report a quote UFO unquote. Perhaps he was allowing them to relate what they were seeing without stigmatizing it. Do you believe that was the case? That was purposeful?
Yeah, and I think that they always are kind of careful of that. They just say, do you have any traffic? No, we're not showing anything. Okay, that's weird. Some of the radio chatter I'm going to release maybe before Christmas as we get around to it. It's funny because they're human. They joke around. But you'll hear pilots like chiming in there and like whispering, it's aliens, or stuff. And the controllers are the ones usually being the very professional ones, despite what the pilots are joking around. But again, fear is a way that people deal with it. Right? I'm sorry, humor. Humor is a way that people deal with fear in a lot of these, because they're up there and they're seeing things and they're like, I'm not even going to go down that road. Ha, ha, ha. But can they explain it? No. And when we, have the opportunity to interview them, usually not in that setting, they're like, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not afraid that it's going to, come and take me, but this is really, really weird because it shouldn't be in the sky.
Well, Debs is going to get the final question with you, but one of the things that I wrote down was that one of the pilots was having an interaction with the controller, and they said, "Oh, this is probably military something or other, and we'll probably never know." And he goes, "You got that right, something." So I'm just paraphrasing here, and I really believe there's a cognitive dissonance that occurs when somebody cannot explain. I can't explain that, and I don't want to believe that it's something that I can't explain. So therefore, I'm going to throw some. Also happens with Bigfoot all the time. What is that? What do you think it is? it just threw something at you. You think there's a baseball player out here in the middle of the woods. But anyway, there's a cognitive dissonance that occurs, and I think that's what happened in that particular instance.
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism, and you'll hear it with witnesses who, more than a couple times I've heard, they see something in the sky, they pull over their car, they get out, they might even video it, and a bunch of people watching it, they get back into their car, drive home with whoever they're with, and don't talk about it at all until like a couple days or sometimes even years later. And they're like, do you remember that weird thing we saw? Holy crap, that is weird. Why would you not be talking about it all the way home? And it might be what you're talking about is that it's so sometimes like earth shattering. Your brain goes into overdrive in trying a defense mechanism of denial. And it's kind of like, I don't even know how to begin to address it. And so they just pretend they block it out. Right. And that happens quite frequently when people don't discuss their sighting, or they forget they have a phone in their pocket and they can watch something for 20 and 30 minutes. And then the first question is, well, did you video it? And we all want to know, why didn't you video it? I don't know. I was just staring at it.
I think we should call that the Kurt Russell phenomenon, since he did that with the Phoenix Lights and he was a pilot who saw it. So yeah, I just wanted to ask about pilots in general, because I heard yesterday in a talk space that I was in, actually, that apparently China's been having people report UFOs since day one. So we're really behind on this. And then there are other pilots that are probably sitting on some interesting stories from NASA, test pilots. And of course, then there's the astronauts. So I was wondering if you were going to broaden your scope.
Yeah, I mean, we're open to anybody. Like, my next report is not even pilots, but we just kind of got on this train with pilots because it's a snowball effect, and we keep getting more and more people reporting to us. And I love all sorts of aviators, anybody who wants to talk about it. So that does seem to be kind of the niche, but you know, I don't know if I've actually talked to any astronaut, you know, one-on-one about things that they've seen, but there are other countries who seem to be more open about this that don't have that stigma. That is entirely true. And why we continue with it here, you know, is beyond silly. You know, I had a guy from Australia, a pilot down there. The same thing happens though. He's like, I have a very uncommon name, and he didn't want me to use his name or anything because he was afraid of it being on the news and him getting in trouble with his airline and everything there. So most Western world countries are kind of like that. And the others, just one side note, getting sucked up into this whole China thing, I'm not sure what to make of this yet, because we saw this shift with the New York Times article, and we're all sitting here waiting for the new UAP report to come out. But it seems like somebody, whether it was intentional or not, or just the New York Times spinning it, they're priming you to make this more of an issue of national security, meaning that we may not know what our adversaries are flying drones, and we hear drones, right? That is also important, but they're conflating the two issues.
Right.
Who cares at this point whether it's China or ET? The issue is you don't dismiss it if you don't know what's swarming your battleship, and you don't know where these things are going, and you don't know who's flying them. You know, that's the first concern, right? And so for you to come out and just say we've determined that most of these things are probably Chinese drones, it's like, that is not comforting either.
Right.
Because do we have that capability? And then you got China over here getting upset, like, prove it. Don't you throw accusations at us if you have no proof. So it was a bad move. I think it's a bad PR move if that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and Ben, couldn't they be dumping like VX pellets on the deck of a carrier if they can just fly with impunity over whatever ship they want? Hey, let's see what kind of munitions we want to drop, or gas or chem. So
yeah, it's a big problem. And if you remember the flap we had, it was like 2 summers ago in the Midwest, Colorado, Nebraska, some states there like North Dakota. They had no idea. The FBI investigated this. they still had no conclusion as to how there were hundreds of look like drones, look like anti-collision lights swarming around, checking out different fields, flying away, and they don't know where they go. That whoever, if it's earthly, that's a massive, like a very coordinated effort, for somebody who's got money, and foreign adversary or somebody else testing stuff out, to go around and to do that in so many locations, that is a security problem, right?
Big
And
time.
so you got both of those issues happening. And I think in the eyes of the media, the problem is the media doesn't care or take the time to separate them and say, okay, most of these are just drones. Okay, let's move on. No,
Intellectual
we haven't
laziness.
determined that. Who's flying them?
Yep. I'm with you. Guys and gals in the chat, we got to get Ben out of here. So we're gonna go with Cabby goodbyes, and then we'll basically beg Ben to come back at another point. But let's start with the Cabby goodbyes, Deb.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to quote Labyrinth, should you need us, we are here. We're happy to help you in your activities.
Awesome. Well, there's 3 of you. You could be like the lone gunman, right?
Okay.
And I just call you up, and we should, for those who have time, we just need time to organize it. We need more manpower on some of this stuff, like tracking down things, because when we work on big cases, I want to get the information out quickly, but it's hard to have competent people, to go out and ask the right questions and to be a force multiplier, right? Some of these cases are really big. And like I just said, in full disclosure, I only monetized my YouTube just a couple months ago because I was like, if I'm going to do this, I had to remonetize it. The only thing that comes out is if somebody clicks on that, and that's fine. But when I've got a wife who's like, why are you doing this again? Like, is it making any money? I'm like, a little bit. It's kind of like, we need more people in order to be able to cover all the ground. So hopefully down the road we'll assemble something like that. I will say we've gone the whole show without talking about Metabunk.
Yeah,
But
and we'll go another 30 shows without talking about that. By the way,
there are some organizations out there who are better organized as far as forums and working on a problem, right? And so eventually we'd like to get to that. There's things I can't talk about yet, but organizations and things that will be able to collect information and hopefully do a community sort of thing where we can solve some of these together. We can look for explanations when there are some, or we can put together patterns and try to figure out what's happening. And I think that is best done as a community. It's just, we got to stop the infighting. We got to stop,
Yes.
tearing people down and theories or character assassinations. If somebody is not, if they've got a good heart in this and they're not legitimately out there to hoax and to do things, like, let's be open to all sorts of theories and let the facts lead us where they may, right? Stick to that and stop attacking each other.
I'm with you, brother.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, and I'll let Nathan go with his Cabby goodbye.
And Ben, that's just so refreshing, and I really appreciate you saying that. And there are a lot of folks out there in the community who I think are eager to help and want to help with the right effort, the right leadership structure. So the person power is there, and hopefully that the time and the kind of stars will align to where we can move these resources in the same direction. But you're a big part of that. I appreciate your openness to this conversation, setting the stage for people to feel comfortable to come forward and talk with you about what they're seeing, even if later on it turns out it's totally prosaic. Hey, that's fine. It's great. Let's figure that out. So thank you for what you're doing. And, you've got big fans on our show here, and we hope that you have a lot of success going forward. Awesome.
Thank you, guys. And thanks for carrying the message. And hopefully we reach that point, because, the government's behind the game here, at least publicly, and what they're, sharing with us, they could use help too. And if they're open to it, we can all work on this together.
I also want to say, in terms of force multiplier, you have three of us here. I have an aviation background, obviously, from the Air Force, and Nathan and Debs also. You could trust if you need us to do some speaking with people or investigating or taking
Awesome.
statements. We won't embarrass you. I promise you that. Doesn't matter which one of us does it, and I do speak the lingo. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much. Namaste for your time, Ben. We're going to stay on and talk for a couple minutes. Your links of everything will be in our show notes when the podcast comes out tomorrow. And we really, really appreciate your time. And I know the aviation community does as well. And I'm going to reach out to the 4 or 5 or 6 guys I know that are gotten off active duty and are flying commercially to ask the question at
Oh,
least,
awesome.
and then direct
Well,
them to you if they do.
actually, there will be some help you could help me with when that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're going to be rolling out some kind of reporting systems and methods to get those reports, and I'm just collecting them right now for my website, UFOwitness.tv. But I think we're going to be using another system pretty soon here that's going to be much larger and gather data better. So I'll let you know that when it comes out, and then you can help me get the word out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have editing to do tonight. We'll stay on for a couple minutes and just praise you for a little while longer. And we hope to see you down the road, brother. Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Peace.
All right.
Peace.
Good man.
Man. Monet.
Amazing.
Debs. How about it?
I
So
I
good.
was thrilled. He was great. He went on more things. He answered all my questions before I could ask them. I got to go look
He,
up his dissertation.
yeah, he did. He did really well. It's interesting. I don't think that the interview went where we thought it was going to go, right? It was
No.
sort of, we thought we were going to talk about these instances, but I think we had a more macro discussion.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I mean, the guy's incredibly thoughtful. He's open to the question. He's seems very genuine. I mean, those are the qualities that we look for, right? We're just trying to have a conversation, and clearly he's ready for that and is eager to have that as well, free of kind of the ridicule and stigma, and as he said, kind of character assassination that tends to take place often in these circles. So that's really refreshing, and I think hopefully is a model that others can follow. So great work on his part to kind of promote that mentality, and I only left with more questions. I know we're eager to have him back and kind of dig into a lot more things, so it'll be exciting in the future.
I wrote notes. Like I had notes for some things that he was saying. I'm like, oh, that's really good. I wrote it down.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think one of the folks from Discovery mentioned something about 30 minutes. I think she asked me how long you usually go. I said, we would go like 60 minutes, and then she might have mentioned something about 30. And I was looking for that email today, and I couldn't find it. But I'm glad Nathan asked the question when he did, because that was what I was thinking, and I'm just glad you asked him that, so that we always want to be respectful of our guest time. But yeah, this was just like like a preliminary discussion, but I feel like he'll come back and speak with us again, and we can dig in, and maybe we can be a help to him if he has somebody that he needs one of us to talk to.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple of things too came to mind. I mean, I think it'd be good to get him connected with Chris Lato and what he's trying to do with UAP Society, because that's another organized effort. Of course, there's the SCU too, and I'm sure he already is aware of that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really jumped out at me, quite frankly, is when he said that of these pilots that he's already spoken with, like, there's basically been zero follow up from anybody. That there's been no follow up from anybody on the task force, no follow up from,
FAA.
So that tells you quite a bit, I think. If you just set the stage with someone who's willing to listen to what's out there, willing to entertain the question, and make people feel comfortable stepping forward and sharing whatever it is that they're seeing, you're going to get information. You're going to get something to take a look at. And instead, we've had just a history of incredible, obfuscation and, just we don't want to deal with this. We don't want to talk about this. We want to stigmatize this. And therefore you have exactly what he talked about. Pilots that feel like it's just not even worth their time because no one's going to listen. No one's going to actually look at this. And I think that's a real concern. I mean, imagine this, DJ, like from your world too. Like imagine this scenario where we have a drone strike that happens on a very sensitive facility somewhere in the United States. And all of a sudden we're like, well, geez, we never saw this coming. This incredible drone technology, it was able to do these crazy things that we couldn't detect it and yada, yada. And like, we look back and did anyone try to think about that or look at that? Oh yeah. Well, we did set up a task force that, was trying to look at this. Well, what did you do with it? Well, we really actually didn't do much at all. In fact, we tried not to even send a report to anyone. We kind of pretended it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it would be a catastrophe, right? I mean, this would be a huge failure of our government to do that. I mean, obviously they're not perfect, but I mean, we're at a stage where if this is drone technology from one of our adversaries, then we better figure this out. We better start, instituting some consequences for that. I mean, if China's just going to kind of buzz our battle groups out in the ocean, I mean, there should be some political consequence to that, to China, whether that's some kind of, tariff or, slap on the hand some other way, or, there are things we can do exactly that would communicate, don't do this, and it doesn't seem like we're doing any of that. So it's a bit perplexing to me.
Well, I have a question for you guys. I'm going to throw this around. Like, I'm going to be DJ for a minute and throw this around for you guys to think about. Why is it, on the one hand, we were doing that obfuscation stuff, right? Like Ruppelt said, they were tossing reports that were being given to Blue Book. There were tons of reports that didn't make it into what people see now. People sometimes wrote them and then didn't file them, or they would write them and be told not to submit them. So why is it, while that was going on, and why for decades we just didn't report anything? At the same time, we had people from the CIA working with our media to put out movies that have to do with this topic. Like that's a real thing. They genuinely worked with Hollywood to make movies on this topic. So what do you guys think about that?
You want me to go first, or you want to go
please,
first?
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
It kind of goes along with what his thesis was, that there's been a slow drip. Obviously, you guys know that for the last maybe 4 or 5 months, I don't know how long, I've kind of come to that hypothesis. I didn't start there. I started with, I'm really angry about Roswell because I get really irritated when somebody lies to me, whether it's an industrial or a macro lie or just an individual. And so that really bugged me. And then I kind of said, well, I disagree with the way they did it, but I understand that. So I think they were playing both sides of the fence. And what you're asking, Deb, actually fits in with Nathan's point about the drone swarms. And the reason that at least for me, I have to go back and talk to that one source I have on this topic that knows some things. But we don't know. It's in their interest to proliferate that because people can digest drones. Drone is something that we could go buy on Amazon. A lot of people do have them. Hell, the real estate agent in Nathan's neighborhood probably has one. So they're sort of everywhere. But when you say, I don't know, that's not something, anybody who's been in a boardroom meeting, has been around one of those big tables. The worst thing that you can say, unfortunately, because sometimes it's the truth, is I don't know. And so I don't know even about the 2019, if I remember correctly, I don't know how many of those were thought to be commercial drones based on what I've seen. And so I'm not sure about that, but I know that story serves them more than I don't know what it is. Even though what Ben was saying is, well, it's still dangerous, because then you're telling me that this Aegis cruiser or this battleship or this battle group can be swarmed and they can't do anything. I don't necessarily believe that, but I'm not 100%. I know that narrative goes over better with the public than it's something that we don't know what the hell it is. So I think that's a continuation, Deb, of playing a couple sides of the fence.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a congressperson that is responsible for some of this, security area. And so, if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, here's an incident that happened, and our battle group, all this, billions of dollars of technology and personnel, we got swarmed by these advanced Chinese drones. That's what we think it is." So that's all we got for you. I guess we're gonna head out of here. We'll see you later. I mean, like, I gotta tell you, I mean, I would be absolutely furious. I would be absolutely furious. So you're telling me it's Chinese drones, okay? Well, what are we doing about it? What is it that we are doing about this problem? Do we have a technology that we can use to combat that? Are we talking with our political counterparts in China? We're talking to the ambassador and saying, "Hey, we know what you guys are doing over here in the Pacific, and this isn't okay. And as a result, we're going to do X, Y, Z to you guys." Are those conversations being had? Are we? You can see where I'm going with this. Like, just to say, as if like you're putting a period on the problem. Like, it could be just Chinese or Russian drones, period. Well, I guess we're done here. I mean, you're not even close to being done. So I think that could take the phenomena out of the equation for just a second, and put yourselves in the shoes of a lawmaker who's sitting in this situation. You're not going to be happy or satisfied with just that answer.
Right.
There's a lot more that has to come from that. So, I think we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about this conversation. But Deb, to your point about collecting the reports and then shifting the narrative in a different direction. I mean, I think DJ pointed this out really appropriately, that Ben's theory that a lot of this is narrative control. And there's a lot in our society, and unfortunately this is true. And I don't think it's there was one point where this was pretty conspiratorial, but I don't think it's that conspiratorial any longer. That there are special interests that do control what is kind of magnified or elevated to conversation in our country. That they can amplify certain talking points over other talking points. And it's not to say they suppress every single bit of information that comes out. I don't think that they're able to do that, but they can amplify messages that they want to amplify. And so this is, in my opinion, a way for those that are, kind of in control. They would rather kind of control the narrative in a way that is safer for them, safer for the country, for the nation's security. You're responsible for a lot of people, and I want to make sure to make this point, is that you're not necessarily doing this from a malicious intent. You're kind of doing this because in your mind you've done the calculus, you've done the assessment, and you've said, you know what, the better way to do this, just for the safety and sake of not only our country but perhaps the world, is to kind of turn the volume down on some of this and turn the volume up on this instead, and let people just kind of go about their lives and buy their holiday presents and have their Thanksgiving dinner, whatever it is. Just do the things that help society run. It's better to do that than to do what Ben described and just like throw a hand grenade into the situation, and then all of a sudden, like, you have a run on gas, you have a run on all these things, and it just it's a cascading problem. Exactly. And that you literally cannot control, and then the system begins to collapse. Like, I think that's a very real possibility. And to me, there's an argument here that what they have done is in some ways responsible, and I can still not like it, even if it was responsible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have to
One
say,
thing I was going to.
yeah.
The one thing I was going to say, I want to ask you guys about, because he alluded to connection, how we're all connected. And so if I ask you as an East Coaster, if we were in, let's say, 1980, were you aware of the Dogtown Z-Boys in Venice, and they're sort of skating in pools and creating vertical skateboarding. Were you aware of that in the 80s?
I was
I've
very
heard about it.
little.
I've
I,
I,
I, w-
I've heard about it. Yeah.
yeah, I was not aware of it in the 80s. Obviously, I'm aware of it as of whenever it came out, like 2004 or 2003, when it got to cable channels and we got to discover them. But if you are someone like Nathan in Kentucky, or growing up in the South, or myself in New York, or Debs in Maryland, you didn't know about the Dogtown Z Boys, but it was happening, and it was huge in California. And unless you were maybe a subscriber to a skateboarding magazine, maybe you probably knew. But in that way, now we're all connected and we would know. And I think that's one, when Ben said that, we're all connected, things spread so fast, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I'm not sure what other platforms that people proliferate news on. I think that's where the wildfire and the grenade that you were just talking about. And I'm sorry, Debs.
Yeah, I was only gonna say that I feel like, yeah, we're a lot more aware. I agree with that. I think everything's happening very quickly. Nothing really requires all that much money anymore for us to get this information. People are sharing more openly now. All of those things are a big part of this. Um, People are getting the technology to film things on their own without, it being overly prohibitive, like they used to be. But I wanted to go back a little bit to what Nathan had said, because I want to highlight this, and someone actually commented on this in the chat also. If these were Chinese or Russian, it would have already been an international incident, in my opinion. If that They would have already shot them down, and we've been told that they have not been able to shoot some of these down, right? So that's a highlighting that it's a bigger issue than that. Um, but it would have already been an incident. It would have already been on the news. They would have already
It's a good
blasted
point.
them. They would have already, like, and the fact that the public knows this much about that already, that they've had hearings about it, that there's an NDAA and all that. No, they would have already said China's doing this to us and made a big deal about it.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
Great
And
point.
notice too how much kind of narrative diversity they are tolerating with this subject. So by not saying anything definitive about what it actually is, they're permitting this wide diversity of theory making, from the public about, well, is it this, is it that, if why even tolerate that? Like, so that there has to be, it must benefit them in some way to tolerate the proliferation of a lot of different theories, as opposed to saying, you know what, no, it's actually none of that. That's none of it. Literally is this. So
Right.
end of story. Like, it is this. And
Yeah.
not only is it this, but we are working on things to actively combat that, and by that too, they can say, hey, Department of Defense or Congress or whatever, in order for us to actively combat that, we need more money for, R&D and XYZ. We need to, so there are a lot of things that could come out of a definitive statement from the government on what it actually is. And there is no definitive statement. There is basically a void. So they're willing to tolerate a void. And the question I would have is, why is that? Does it benefit them to just kind of let us, speculate all day long about whatever it is? Is the thinking that an amplification of exotic technology, somehow is a specter of U.S. dominance that deters our foreign adversaries? I mean, we don't need the public chatter bubble to kind of make that kind of pronouncement. Like, if the government wants to say, hey, we've developed amazing technology that could totally do whatever we want to do in an instant on the planet or from space, like, you would think they would demonstrate that, or tell our adversaries directly about it. I mean, that would make them pretty fearful of, or at least make them think twice about flying a DJI drone over a battleship or whatever, or
You know
a
what?
drone of any other kind for that matter.
You're right, because DJ, you've said it before people in the U.S. Air Force, for instance, are all about defending the skies, they would definitely want to show that they can defend us against drones, wouldn't they? So the
Yeah,
fact that they haven't done that is very telling.
yeah. I mean, I'll take you guys inside sort of prisoner of war training, where you're meant to you go in a lab. It looks like a prison, but they call it a lab. And they make sure that you feel like you're in a prison by breaking you down a little bit before you get in there for a week or so. And then when you get in there, they teach you how to answer. They've taught you ahead of time how to answer questions. Hopefully you remember it when you get there. And they say delay, distract, digress to irrelevancies. So if you're being asked these direct questions, how do you answer? Delay, distract, digress to irrelevancies. And I think that sounds kind of similar to the tactics that they're using, that you can, they're, without naming people, that if Nathan just mentioned a void, that they've created that void, that they can allow your individual on UFO Twitter to fill that void with whatever their worldview is or whatever their proclivities are to feel about something that we don't know what it is. So they open that space. So what does that do? That creates confusion, and that's good because then people can't zero in on you can't unify behind an idea because there's a zillion ideas out there and people are have these sort of torches and so forth that they're and spears and shields, so it's very helpful to them, very helpful.
Right. I think that's a great point. But and kind of to follow on to that too. So if you wanted them unified on something that would benefit you, in this case, you as the government here, whether that's increased spending, funding, whatever, which is usually what the government wants. You would actually tell them, right? I mean, you would make it a clear and present danger to the public. Yeah. Right.
Don't sue us. Hey, hold on, Harrison
Right.
Ford. Wait a minute.
Right. You would make it pretty explicit, because an explicit danger is something that people will react viscerally to. Like you said, if there's no explicit pronouncement about what the danger happens to be, then there's very little action. There's a lot of inaction. In fact, it's just there's like a stasis of inertia, right? But if you had this pronouncement, hey guys, like our adversaries have developed this amazing tech, and we're really behind the eight ball. Like the only thing that you've heard that's even close to that is with hypersonic weaponry, right? Hypersonic weapons, which is the big kind of thing now. But you're not hearing that with this, with UAPs. So that tells me that, at least I think anyway, that whatever the actual facts are is either A, they just literally don't know what they are, or B, they do know what they are, but they don't want to talk about it yet, because talking about it does not serve them right now in some form.
I like A. I like
yeah, and they could be completely oblivious.
I can't imagine that they could. Again, Jim Semivan, it makes the most sense. They know more than we do, obviously, but there's no way they could know
Right.
Oh my
There's just no. I mean, the origin of it's probably more likely too complex and too diverse that they don't have a handle on it. And that was his whole reasoning, was if they don't understand it, they can't explain it. And again, we're back to the boardroom. Is it good to say I don't know? Not a great idea.
I just had a fabulous flash go through my head just now. What if the government is not admitting what it is clearly because they're afraid their soldiers won't want to face it? The pilots won't want to face it. They're afraid of the military being terrified, and they don't care whether or not the public's terrified at all, but they don't want people to be afraid to go in the air.
Let me give you an example of how that's probably not the case. David Fravor, with no weaponry at all, turned and pointed his aircraft to try to run into that thing. And I've said probably some from the first shows that we ever did, Nathan, when we talked about this incident, which some of the very early shows, that was an extreme act of bravery because he didn't know what would happen. That could have been a Class A accident if that craft were not agile enough to avoid him. So I don't think that's the case. I think people will fire on anything. I just think that it they probably don't understand the entire gravity of the phenomenon. I don't think. So we've gone a little past an hour, but let's I thought we could do if anybody's got a last point, and then just say, we can kind of like say hello to people in the chat after anyone's got a last point that they want to make.
Well, I just was gonna bring up the conference that we got to go to and say it was awesome. That's all. I'm sorry. Like that's my summary of it. It was awesome. I love the fact that we're heading in an intellectual um, path. We're going on an intellectual path. So, two or three major things are happening with the UFO community. One, more intellectuals are coming on board, scientists, academics, so on and so forth,
You,
openly,
for
you
instance.
know, not invisibly. Then we have social media. So, like, we're all on the same page instantly. We all know what's going on. We have really smart people giving us data, like, immediately. And then the third is just this, sense of unity of like, we need to get this organized. Like I've been saying that a lot to people. A lot of people that I talk to are on the same page. Ben said it today. That's one of my favorite things is we're going to get this done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's awesome, Deb. Yeah, I mean that conference was great, and kudos to James and Jay for putting that together, and the time and energy that it took to get that put together. I mean, it's not easy to do those things, and the energy was great, the quality of the conversation was great, and I would expect that trend to continue into 2023. And you're right in pointing out, Deb, that the community is changing in some, I think, notable and important ways. In some ways, the kind of delay, the lack of the latest tidbit from the UAPTF or whatever has been beneficial, because I think it's allowed us to focus on the things that really matter. I think a lot of the um, distraction, honestly, is on the fixation on like the technology and whatever it is that's in the sky. I mean, I want to know what it is, obviously, but a lot of it's kind of like a cat with a laser pointer. It's just like like it's not really a concerted effort. And I think figuring out the deeper issues here, and these conferences really do explore those contours, and that's what I'm interested in, because at the end of the day, to me, this is a question about what is ultimate reality. What is our place in reality? Why are we here? Um, and a UFO craft isn't answering that question, no matter how fancy it is. But it
Right.
does point in the direction that I think allows us to ask those questions, and I think connect with each other and with ourselves in a way that is a lot more meaningful, at least in a way that maybe we haven't done it in quite some time. And the world needs a lot of meaning right now. We need to have those conversations that allow us to really connect with each other, and not just like, snipe at each other from social media. That's not very helpful.
I I can't say what either of you said any better than you said it about the event and what it meant and the positivity and the togetherness. So I just want to say that I agree 100% with you, both Deb and Money. What struck me was the contrast between how well we're doing, even if there's a lot of folks that feel like we're not doing well as a community in terms of representation and progress. And now, due to Nathan's fault, with the Bigfoot community, they are so far behind us that I contacted our good friend, whom we hope to have on with David Smethurst, who's in the chat. Very soon, we got to rebook he and Dan Warren because they're basically giving up their spot for the cab holiday party this Sunday, graciously. We appreciate that, because if had they balked, we probably would have just done their episode. Um, so Dan is going to connect me with Congressman Burchett, who I guess either believes in the existence of Bigfoot or had a sighting or knows somebody who had a sighting, something, and I'm gonna try to see if they can get some traction on there. But they're nowhere near where we're at. You know, when we have New York Times folks, we have an Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence speaking on stage, two reporters from the New York Times actually, authors, academians, Jeff Kripal. I mean, as Vinny said to me this week, they have like Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and like that's about it. So, you know, what do you guys, you know, Deb, what do you think about that contrast? And then money.
Well, you know that I would be really interested in getting in there and figuring out what's going on with that. You know, if I had the time, I would. But I
Yeah.
would be that person going, you know, we have someone organizing all of our files right now in a national archive. Maybe you guys should do something like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, maybe highlighting the bend that we're going towards with science and things like that. And they could start pulling in anthropologists, cryptologists, you know, people have really been studying the scientific aspect and kind of pushing those people forward. I feel like it's really tough because two things are going on. On the one hand, we're recognizing the value of experiencers more and more, right? But that's testimonial. And then on the other hand, we're recognizing the value of studies and research and the intellectual bend to all of it. So that seems to be the formula we're working with right now. Maybe that's the formula they need too.
Well, how do you see the contrast between these two communities, Nathan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and two, I would like to point out that the UFO community is, it also exists across a lot of different spaces. But in contrast to the Bigfoot community, there doesn't seem to be a strong Twitter Bigfoot presence. You know, like you've pointed out to me, it's primarily on Facebook. The UFO community congregates on Facebook and on Twitter. There is some overlap, but not necessarily a lot. I think that one of the good things and bad things about Twitter is that it's like a pressure cooker kind of environment for communities, right? So if you can go through that trial, that intense pressure that is brought on by the social media, a kind of quick, short, terse engagement, you can get through that and come out on the other end. You're probably a stronger community for it. Um, and so I think that's sort of at least what I'm seeing on the UFO Twitter side. There is this kind of emergence of stronger community coming out from quite a number of uh, silly little squabbles, in my opinion. It's maturing, in other words, right? And and I think the speed that Twitter operates as well, like, allows us to be a little bit more agile, a little more nimble in how we react to information and share information. Um, so that could be of value to the Bigfoot community, but at the same time, it's a kind of a cautionary tale as well, right? So if the Bigfoot community decides to come into Twitter more actively, like, I think they will see a lot of the same stuff that we have seen, the kind of personal attacks and bad faith arguments and conversation. They're going to have to wade through that.
That's a great one. Bad faith arguments.
I
I
mean, it
love it.
is,
I
right?
haven't heard it put that way. That's
No, it's
great.
true. I mean, there's so much of that
Yep.
happening where we're just not being generous with one another, where you can tell people are entering into conversation with each other, not at all for the purpose of trying to reach understanding, but
No.
to basically score points. So
Yeah.
so you're entering into the conversation with a desire to win, not with a desire to reach any kind of consensus or understanding, to further the discussion. So that to
Congress.
me is bad faith. Yeah.
It's-
So I mean,
When
there's a definite contrast. I'm hopeful for that community, though. I mean, they're like,
yeah.
there's a lot of potential here for new areas, new avenues of discovery, new partnerships. That's the beauty of online interaction, and I've experienced that in other areas of my own life. Is that you can, if you're thoughtful and intentional, you can really build communities that are quite powerful and have a lot of staying power. So I hope that happens for these communities, because they really do bring people together, and there are some big questions that are worth pursuing.
I think
They're
uh,
they're
I just want
getting. Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
I just wanted to say one thing to also consider is instead of considering them the Bigfoot community or talking about the UFO community, maybe we should move forward to we're all one community
Of
and we can
of
help each
course,
other.
of course. No question. I mean, that would be my goal is, and that's what we're doing with this show. We're trying to bring in, Matt Knapp is going to come in and we're going to engage with him and try to bring some Bigfoot people in here. So it's kind of, become sort of a secondary cab mission. Um, they are found a way to attack each other on Facebook and on their whatever forums that they use. I have not been on any of their forums, or if they're on Discord, I don't know any of that. But on Facebook, they have found a way to do that. And I agree with Nathan. They're not as agile as we are, but they are having as many conferences and big conferences as we are. So when I look at the one stark contrast between the UFO community, and I understand what you mean, Deb, we should be talking about it as one community. I agree with you. But when I look at the stark contrast between the Bigfoot community and the UFO community, it's that they have no representation. There is no New York Times article. There is no Lou Elizondo. There is no Christopher Mellon. There is no David Fravor. There is no Chad Underwood. There is no Ryan Graves, et cetera. And we could just keep going with, and they don't have that. I mean, Vinny said it. Vinny and I had like a 4:45, and I don't know what time it was in the morning. I was driving to work. It was like 5 something in the morning. And he said, yeah, he said they have like Dr. Jeff Meldrum and just a couple of people. And it's just not enough. We have a Gary Nolan and an Avi Loeb because of those people we just talked about. So we could just leave it there and say hello to everybody in the chat, but that's my opinion. They really need representation. They really need some big hitters. They are also, we're dealing with the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense cares nothing about Bigfoot except if they interfere with like Fort Lewis and McCord, which has happened. There's been supposedly some interactions out in the forest there, but it's the Department of the Interior, and I know nothing about the Department of the Interior. So, and what their stance is, and then what happens is that your state parks fall on, not that they fall underneath there, but I think they fall in line with what the Department of Interior's take is on that when it comes to state and county and so forth parks, and I think they just their rangers and so forth follow along. Let's say hello to people in the chat. Linda's here. Linda Thompson, what's up, home girl?
What's up, Linda?
Okay,
Good
you
to
guys
see you.
can say something now.
No, I was
Oh
looking,
yeah, hi.
I was looking for her message so I could put it up.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Good to have you with us, Linda. We've got a bunch of folks. So Channel Warhorse, good to see you.
Yep.
Smithest. Michael Ashworth.
Yeah, hi, Michael.
Smethurst, yes.
I love the things David's saying about what we're talking about.
Yeah,
He's brilliant, man.
David's amazing. Who did I miss here just a second? So Kurt M, good to have you with us as well.
Av Gutne. I love that. How do we say that? Kurt was the first one in, Nathan. Kurt was here before we were here.
I'm slow on the draw here, so my apologies, Kurt. Good to have you with us. Yeah.
I want to know how to say that name. She's saying hi to Linda. I wish she could say it. I wish she'd come up on audio. But
just a quick point out to folks who are watching, we do have a holiday show coming up on Sunday. DJ mentioned it. We're very excited about it. It's 2 Eastern Sunday, the Cab Holiday Party, second annual Cab Holiday Party. We're going to have over 20 guests appearing on the show over the course of, I think, roughly probably 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours. It should be a lot of fun. It's just going to be hanging out with folks that you're familiar with, people that you've interacted with on social media and through other excellent podcasts and channels. These are friends of our show. They're friends of ours in real life, in most instances too. A lot of great people. So I know we're going to have some fun and also interesting conversation on Sunday. So we hope that you guys join us and for some holiday cheer.
It'll start out organized, and then as we tweet the link out to or DM the link, it'll turn into something of a free for all.
Total chaos, yeah.
and probably a bunch of our friends. We need to get it out to just think of this, Deb, Nathan, a bunch of our friends we met at the symposium of the Anomalous. We got to get it out to a bunch of those people that I probably haven't even. So let's do that, and we get to the free for all portion. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Oh, and we might even play a little UFO trivia, which I guess we need to start working on if we're going to do that. But very excited about it. Should be a good time.
Thank you. Love you guys very much. And for Debs, for Nathan, this is DJ and Cab saying peace out. One love. We'll see you down the road. And as always, we're wondering what's up around the bend.